that's where we're at with this. So I've turned on the recording, and now I'm going to start the broadcast on Facebook, which you will bear with me as I go through the motions of what I have to do to make this happen, which is click, 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 click. And the reason I do this is because this is where our video archive lives, on Facebook under the videos tab. So all of our classes that are broadcastable are broadcasted, and the ones that we record because for some reason the broadcast wouldn't work, we upload them so that we have a permanent record of all the classes that we've done. So what is today? Today's 1/4/2021. Uh-oh. Okay, bear with me. Someone needs to sing a nigun while I'm doing this, please.
Right. Da-dee, ya-bye-bye-ya, da-da-ya, da-dee, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, a new year, it will be a better new year. Halavai be a better year than that awful 2020. We'll lift a cup of kindness and l'chaim, dear, for a much better year.
Amen, amen, gewalt.
my Scottish self.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful. Okay, welcome everybody. Happy to be with you again on our journey through the zodiac. As we rock around the zodiac, I'm going to share my screen, and
rock around.
So that's my subtitle to this class, is rock around the zodiac, because we started in the beginning in Nissan, and we're all the way to Tevet. This is a long journey, 12 months. So if you have not been in this class before, I just want to give you a little background about what we're doing here. We are looking at the interesting discrepancy between what is written and what is done. In the Shulchan Aruch, it says one should not inquire of astrologers and not consult lots, which is a divination tool. And on the other hand, you can take that one little line and then you can look at everything else, which is a tremendous amount of astrological motifs in art and artifacts and architecture all throughout Jewish history, in every Jewish civilization, without exception, shows that astrology was a common component in the lives of Jewish communities. It was just there. It was something that we had in our lives, and it's something that's been lost in terms of our quotidian relationship with it, our everyday knowledge of it, really after the Holocaust, after World War II, and the death of the predominant number of the Jewish community worldwide. We have a real separation now. We have a world of text. It says one thing, and we have a world of lived experiences and ways of being Jewish that we're completely cut off from. And astrology is one of those things. Okay, so just taking a very quick look at some of the things that we have that proves that astrology was part of every Jewish community. We've got zodiac from antiquity, from the first century that we have, from in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Cairo Geniza, all throughout our history in every location. We've got zodiac themes in art, architecture, especially in synagogues, on the walls, on the floors, on the mosaics. So why is that? Because it's related to the 12 tribes, the 12 signs of the zodiac. Because we're a people that likes to categorize things, we took astrology, which was clearly in existence far before the first quote unquote Jewish person, if you want to say that, Abraham, our patriarch, Father Abraham, Abraham was called Ha-Ivri, the one who comes from the other side, who's the father of the Abrahamic religions, but most important to us right now, the Jewish faith, the Jewish people. From his time, astrology was already a full-blown science, art, language that was shared and was ubiquitous throughout every single civilization that we've ever discovered. We haven't ever found a civilization that hasn't had a relationship with the stars for obvious reasons, because up until relatively recently in human history, if you wanted to have any light at night, like electricity, you had to have lived after the invention of electricity. Other than that, you had candlelight, torchlight, firelight, but the big show in the sky was what was really happening. And people were extremely familiar with the stars in their neighborhood. You could live in one town, one city, you, your father's father for a million years, and everybody knows that the stars at one point in the season are in one place. I mean, the planets are in one place. Planets are what were called wandering stars. There's the fixed stars that are always in the same place, and then there's the planets that move, and their movements were understood by the ancients to indicate things that have to do in heaven and things that have to do on earth. So in our mythology, in our worldview, we have the 12 tribes that correspond to the 12 signs of the zodiac, and it is laid out in the Torah itself in Bamidbar chapter 2, where the division of the tribes is laid out for each one of the 42 encampments that the children of Israel made throughout their wandering in the desert. 42 times they camped in the same exact configuration, always with Yehuda on the east, Ephraim in the west, Reuben to the south, and Dan to the north. And of course, Dan is the subject that we're going to talk about today, because we're going to be looking into Capricorn. It is a case of as above, so below. It's a reflection. It's a reflection of one thing or another. So we are in Mazal Tevet, the month of Capricorn. It's actually the 20th of Tevet today. This is an interesting thing, because we always think of Capricorn, the goat, but it's more than a goat. Capricorn has a lot of different iconography associated with it. Here you see from one of the oldest representations of Capricorn as a fish goat. This is from a celestial map from Salzburg in the year 818, not 1818, but actually 818. So this is very, very old. And here from 1844, from a Machzor, you have Capricorn as, again, a goat in the front and this fishtail in the back. So this is a throwback to the mythical Capricorn animal that's from a story from this nymph who was the nursemaid, so to speak, to the god Zeus, after Zeus's mother had to hide him from his angry father who was going to eat him, and in fact did. Of course, he threw him up later with all his brothers and sisters, and that's another story. Okay, so this is the Capricorn goat with a fish tail, also from the Tiberias Synagogue, 4th century. And this was recently excavated. Only a few years ago, they discovered this 5th century synagogue. And you see, again, he has the fish goat sort of a motif, which is very interesting, actually, if you think about the idea of water and earth and the whole progression that we're going through in this side of the zodiac, which we'll get to. This is from a Torah binder in Germany, 1877, Mazal Gidi. It's clearly a goat, not a fish. It's really the most common depiction of Capricorn is just a male goat or a kid. You see it a lot. Here we've got interesting combinations. This one's from a Machzor, a German Machzor from 1290. And here is from the very famous Michael Machzor, 1258. They're both very similar motifs. It is Capricorn and Aquarius combined, and Capricorn and Aquarius are both the zodiac signs that are ruled by the planet Saturn in classical astrology. Okay, obviously in modern astrology, Capricorn is ruled by Saturn and Aquarius is ruled by Uranus and Saturn. It's co-ruled. So we'll be getting the planet Uranus in more in our next installment when we talk about Chodesh Tevet and Aquarius. And we're going to talk more about Saturn in the next class as well as this one, because it's an overlap in very many interesting ways. This is a Sagittarius and Capricorn from a Torah crown in Israel. It's going this way. So it's just a regular goat. And the progression of the signs, of course, because Sagittarius Kislev comes before Tevet. Sagittarius and Kislev are connected by Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the festival that connects them, starts on the 25th, of course, lasts for 25th of Kislev and lasts for 8 nights. And it brings that positive Jupiter energy into the month of Tevet, which Tevet needs because Tevet is a very heavy month for many reasons. This is from 5 Books of Moses that was created for the Duke of Sussex in the year 1300 and has the 4 cardinal signs. Judah, Yehuda, which is Aries, Ephraim, Libra, Reuben, Cancer, and Dan, Capricorn. And here Dan is depicted as an eagle. So that's one of the, I'm sorry, Dan is a snake. Which one is he that's a snake? Oh, I guess it's this one. This is the one. Okay. So there's one of the blessings refers to him as a servant. So Dan was blessed by his father Yaakov with this blessing. He said, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a horned snake in the path that bites the horse's heel, so that the rider falls backward. I wait for thy salvation, O Lord. Such an interesting little interjection there in the middle of this blessing for Dan from his father. And then when Moses blesses the tribe of Dan, he says, about Dan, he says, Dan is a lion's club springing out of Bashan. This is a picture of the tribe of Dan as a snake from a synagogue in Romania in 1899. Here we have the tribe of Dan as a snake from the 1920s. And this is also from 1920, but Tevet as a goat. So you see that there's like a real variation between Tevet and the tribe of Dan. This is a really recent kind of art form. It's a Jerusalem street mosaic. Dan is represented as the scales here, which is very confusing because we think of Libra as the scales, right? Moznaim literally means the scales, and Libra is always depicted as the scales or a hand holding the scales, but the scales have always been the symbol for Libra, but here we have it showing up as the symbol for Dan. What's that about? So it's also here, Dan is represented as the scales here. And I think this is because in this system, we don't have, Libra we don't have the split of the tribes of Joseph, this is the chronological, what's it called? The chronological system rather than the Kabbalistic system. So this is an example of that. And here we have Dan being totally usurping this symbol, which of course upsets me. And there I was at the Kotel a few years ago, and I looked up on the women's section, and lo and behold, there was a gigantic clock there. I took this picture that you see on the lower right here. I was astonished to look up and see, when I was trying to see what time it was, I noticed that Dan was the scale. And I'm like, that's wrong. It's not like Libra o'clock. That doesn't work. And then I noticed that I would like to call this the modern Zionistic movement's reimagining of the zodiac, because they've taken some of the iconography and reimagined it for the modern Israeli state and the modern Israeli way of perceiving the tribes of Israel, which is pretty much divorced from a lot of the traditional astrological ideas. This is a Talmud Torah in Budapest in the 20th century. Also, you see Dan up there as the scales right up here. So there's an agenda there, folks. Always have to watch the art for the agenda. Here in this very, very modern Temple Israel of New Rochelle. And how do we know New Rochelle, everybody? Of course, it's where Dick Van Dyke's show was set. Laura Petrie and Rob Petrie lived in New Rochelle, as everybody knows. But they didn't go to Temple Israel. But if they had, they would have seen the tribe of Dan portrayed as a snake with holding the scales. So it's really kind of an amalgam here. And over here in Beth Israel Congregation in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, Dan is the scale. This is 1972. So this is like modern. All of a sudden it's, okay, he's the scale. Why? Because he's the sign of judgment. Dan guarded the northern borders of Israel. His flag and tribe was the northernmost portion around the Mishkan. So we want to talk about the idea of north as an idea, as a symbolic idea. It's a symbolic idea for darkness and judgment. It's the place where the sun is hiding, so to speak. It's also associated with material wealth and gold. And there's a midrash that says that it was from the north that the tribe of Dan received the gold that it contributed to the making of the golden calf. It's a play on this phrase that basically says, he who wants wealth should hide himself or face north. Face north is the play on words there. So it has said that the tribe of Dan brought spiritual darkness into this world, which occurred when Yeravam Bet Nevat made 2 golden calves. He went all around Israel, but they did not accept it from him, except for the tribe of Dan. This is told in Isaiah. This is not a good picture at all of what the Dan's flag looks like. I was very disappointed in not being able to find as good a quality flag with this kind of a serpent on it that was specifically described. This is from the Rambam, I think, that it was Dan's flag was the color of similar to sapphire, which would be a very dark blue. And embroidered on it was a serpent in allusion to the text, Dan shall be a serpent by the way. The Abarbanel thought that this standard depicted an eagle, as was hinted at in the Midrash in Yaakov's blessing to Dan, which symbolized him by a type of a certain kind of snake called a shephion, which I'm sure I'm not pronouncing right, which had wings in order to fly swiftly. And the Abarbanel explains that this is an eagle. So there's all this shifting sort of iconography with Tevet, Capricorn, Dan, eagle, snake, goat, sea goat, scales. It's not a settled thing here.
The 1001 Nights, the imagery in the Arabian folktale iconography influences the Jews as well in the Middle Ages.
Yes,
some of the drawings of the animals.
Right. Were you thinking that from the?
They don't draw it in Islam, but there's the Sipurei Mishalim. There are various medieval depictions of animals associated with the tribes in medieval folklore that you could look at that influence astrological imagery, I think. But that's another trajectory.
Okay,
Sorry.
well, no, it's okay. I'd like to see those. I mean, I'm looking at art all the time for stuff like this. So, but the problem is, or the challenge is that, Islam didn't make figures.
Right. They describe them.
But in Persian art, there is Persian art.
Persian,
but not.
We're not Arabic, yeah.
Yeah. So this is a detail from Rachel and Bilhah with Dan, the Story of Jacob series. It's a big tapestry Dan was the son of Bilhah. Dan was the first child that Rachel claimed as her own because Bilhah was her maidservant that she gave to Yaakov to bring forth children. I'm not going to go through the whole thing of who was Bilhah, who was Zilpah. Were they really maidservants? Were they sisters? Were they even real people? That's like an entire series in itself. So we're just going to take this on face value simply just for symbolic reasons and say that what Rachel said, this was recorded, not the words of Bilhah, the birth mother. Rachel was the mother, quote unquote, said, Hashem has judged me and has also heard my voice and has finally given me a son. Therefore, she called his name Dan. Dan means to judge, like din, Dan. Also means to find guilty or to justify. Rashi says, Hashem has judged me and at first found me guilty, which caused my childlessness. Then Hashem judged me again because he listened to my voice, my prayers, and he finally cleared me. This is how Rashi explains this verse. Of course, having children was the most important thing to the matriarchs in the story. And Dan was the first one of the maidservants' children that was born to Rachel. So he had a very important place. This is maybe why he's on one of the 4 cardinal signs. We'll get to that picture in a little bit. Now, Yaakov referred to Yehuda. Let's talk about the confusing iconography of lion, right? Moses' prophecy for Dan, he says, he's a lion's cub or a lion's whelp in the King James Version that leaps from Bashan, which is the Golan Heights. So of course, everybody knows that Yaakov refers to Yehuda as a young lion. And of course, the standard for Yehuda is a lion. If you go to Jerusalem and you look at everything all over the municipality, you see the lion of the tribe of Yehuda, but Yehuda is Aries, the ram. So you see that there's a lot of mix and match in terms of the symbolism here. So the idea, the Zohar says that when they were traveling through the desert, there was a lion at the head of them, Yehuda, and a lion at the rear, Dan, because Dan brought up the rear. And there's also a hint that Bashan is to the east of Dan's territory and has to do with the water there, that Rashi says that the word Yarden, Jordan, is composed of the 2 words Yored Dan, meaning coming, Yored, like to make Yerida, to go down, coming down from Dan. So there's a geographical component to the name as well that gives you an idea of where this tribe was. So our rabbis say Dan is a young lion, refers to Shimshon, Samson, a descendant, the most famous probably descendant of the tribe of Dan. Okay. Interestingly, you know how all of the different peoples of this world are associated with some zodiac sign or another. The sign of Capricorn is associated with the Philistine nation. And it's said that for this reason, Shimshon from the tribe of Dan gave his Philistine wife a goat as a gift. Why? He wanted to purify the evil influence of the Philistine at the root. The Philistines were always a problem for the Jewish people, as everybody knows. Whenever Israel did something bad in God's eyes, they were delivered into the hands of the Philistines. Philistines were used as a rod against Israel, right? They have the power of stern judgment. Their name, the gematria of Felishtim 860, which is 10 times the divine name, the name which denotes judgment. And 10 is a number of authority, the authority of judgment. So Shimshon couldn't do it, but he tried. And of course, this is a famous depiction of the death of Samson when he brought down the whole house with his great strength, destroying the Philistines by destroying himself. Sad story. There's something sad about that, right? That also goes to where we're going here in the story of Saturn. So not to get so far into this, because really, again, it's another whole class by itself, academic and historical controversies about the tribe of Dan. So lots of times within this class, We are talking about symbols. We're talking about archetypes. We're talking about rabbinic ideas, symbolism, all of this stuff, but we're not really talking so much about historical, critical historical ideas about, were there really children of Israel? Did they really cross the desert? That's not what this class is about. This is about astrology, but I have to mention about Dan. It's one of the more controversial tribes. Some say that they weren't part of Israel at all, that they were another people that joined Israel later. There's a lot of scholarship on it. There's really no agreement whatsoever about it. Interestingly, the Ethiopian Jews claim to be descended from the tribe of Dan, and our dear beloved and dearly departed Chief Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, his memory should be for a blessing, said, of course, he's the one who made them kosher. He koshered the Ethiopian Jews and brought them to Israel. And part of his reasoning was that it was obvious to him and to anyone he needed to prove it from, to that the tribe of Dan were related to him. And there's a voodoo god called Dambhala, which is a snake god that like created the world. He created the cosmos by using his 7,000 coils to form the stars and the planets in heaven. So this god came over to the world of voodoo, which really is more of a West African and Caribbean idea, from some offspring of what they call a heterodox form of Ethiopian Judaism. Interesting. So to me, that's an interesting full circle in a way, back to the tribe of Dan with the snake. So here we are in the Jewish year. We started over here to the far left of the picture where it says East with Yehuda and Nissan. We have been going, as I said, rocking around the zodiac. We're 3/4 of the way done. And we're now in this quadrant of the zodiac in the north here. This is the handmaidens, kids. Last 3 months, we were doing Rachel's boys, okay? We were doing Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin, the sons of Rachel. We're still in Rachel right now because we're in Tevet. Tevet is Dan. Dan is the son of Bilhah, but that means that he belongs to Rachel as well. So we're Rachel, 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 Rachel. Then next month, Shvat, and the next class, we're going to talk about Asher, who was the son of Zilpah, who was Leah's handmaiden. And then Bilhah had one more child at the end of her fertility period there for Rachel, who was Naphtali, which rules Pisces. So here we started at the beginning with Mars, Venus, Mercury, then Moon, Sun, Mercury, Leah's handmaiden there with Virgo. So Leah and her team, they have the entire bottom part of this figure. And then starting at Libra, we have Rachel, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, then Saturn, Jupiter. Saturn, this is the only part of the zodiac where you have two, in the classical system, of course, because we don't count Uranus in the classical system. So you have Saturn next to each other. Saturn, it's the only time you have the same planet next to each other in this lineup, or is it? Because really, Saturn here is like Sun, Moon, which is opposite it in Tammuz and Av, which is Cancer and Leo. And we're going to show more about that in a few more slides and how that works. So Tevet, Capricorn, corresponds to the knees and medical melathesia and the bones, the skeletal structure. This is our famous Jewish zodiac man. And up until relatively recently, it was thought that you could do good medicine by knowing what zodiac signs are associated with the different body parts and treating them thusly, whether making segulot or amulets to attempt to heal people, or to understand the different signs of the times, knowing what day of the month it is, to affect certain healing remedies. And who knows, could work or not. Okay, Tevet, in our journey around the 12 ways that you can mix up these letters of the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, we're at Hey, Yud, Hey, Vav. This is the permutation of the 4-lettered name of God that you get when you mix them up and reassemble them according to their deep Kabbalistic meanings. So according to the Sefer Yetzirah, Tevet was formed by the letter Ayin. It has to do with the attribute of anger and mastering it. It's the mountain goat, rules the liver in terms of an internal organ. There's an idea of want and somehow an idea of a lack or lack of abundance in the month of Tevet, which is interesting because Tevet starts off in the middle of Hanukkah, right? So it starts on the 25th. By the time you get to Rosh Chodesh Tevet, you have an abundance of light, and all the light accumulates on Zod Hanukkah, the 8th night of Hanukkah, which is already like what, the 3rd of Tevet or something like that. There's a lot of light, a lot of abundance, but there's a contradiction because the idea of Saturn, the ruling planet of Tevet, has the idea of restriction. This is a very important concept to understand with Saturn, which is about boundaries and borders and restrictions. There's a little thing that from the Sefer Emet on Hanukkah. It says Tevet does have a connotation of light from the word hatava, meaning preparation of the wick, referring to the lights of Hanukkah. According to the Ari, Shvat and Tevet correspond to the 2 eyes, and then the 2 eyes are also corresponded to in the summer months, Tammuz and Av. So these are opposite signs. It's the dichotomy between Saturn's 2 months of Tevet and Shvat and Saturn's opposites, right? The moon, Tammuz, and the sun, because Saturn is a little sun. So it's said that these months are given over to Esav, but then that's diminished. So only part of Av and part of Shvat come under the din of judgment. So there's quite a lot of din and judgment going on. And this also has to do with, obviously, from the idea of Dan being a judge and Saturn being a pretty judgmental planet. So in our famous verse from Shabbat 156a, in describing all of the different kind of personality traits of people who were born under the different planets, we see he who was born under Saturn will be a man whose plans will be frustrated. Others say all nefarious designs against him will be frustrated. So that's idea of being frustrated, of having things being difficult, because Saturn is a planet that teaches you patience. So you don't learn patience unless you come up against difficulty. Whoops. Okay, so in the planetary, in the section right before that in 156a, they're talking about the planetary days and the planets that rule the different days. It says, he who was born on the Sabbath will die on the Sabbath because the great day of the Sabbath was desecrated on his account. This has to do with Mida Keneged Mida, measure for measure. It's really the essence of Saturn's role in astrology, creating borders, boundaries, limits, and consequences. Okay, so yeah. Okay, I want to talk about this letter Ayin. God gave rule to Ayin and tied a crown to it and combined one thing with another and formed with it Capricorn in the world, Tevet in the year, and the left hand in the body. That's from the Sefer Yetzirah. Okay, so next week, not next week, in a few weeks when we talk about Shvat, you're going to see that Tzadi is the letter for Shvat. So it's almost like a different kind of a mirror image of Ayin. And these 2 letters really go to like the dual nature of dual functionality of Saturn in Capricorn and in Aquarius, the dark, the light, but how these archetypes kind of bleed over into one another a lot. There's this thing called the alphabet of Rabbi Akiva. It's a midrash. It says the letter ayin symbolizes the power of Esav. Its crouched and bent form bespeaks the future downfall of Esav. This depends on the rectification of the sense of sight contained in the eye, ayin, so that it stays clear of the evil influence, right? Bli ayin hara. So the Saturn Capricorn archetype, Capricorns are ambitious, practical, hardworking, conservative, responsible, wise. They're isolated, lonely, solitary, like the hermit or the patriarch. Diligent, precise, persevering, dependable, not dependent. No, they're not dependent. They're dependable. Sober, down to earth, indefatigable, and patient. When they're wounded or undeveloped, Capricorns can also be acquisitive and miserly. Think Ebenezer Scrooge. That's classic Capricorn character right there. So a very negative Capricorn character. Calculating or utilitarian, the one who uses. That's one of the key words of Capricorn, I use. A workaholic, perfectionist, unsatisfied grumbler. Somebody who's controlling and dominating. Merciless, unsociable, a joyless drudge, listless, fearful of innovation or change. Wow, we haven't heard such negative talk about planets for a long time, not since we got into like the negative attributes of Mars, which is the other malefic. In the classical system, Mars and Saturn are the classical malefic, M-A-L-I-F-I-C, as in they have bad intentions. Of course, planets don't have bad intentions. This is what was projected onto them because that's how the story goes. So in modern psychology and modern psychological understandings of the planet Saturn, and how I like to look at Saturn personally as an astrologer in a person's natal chart, has more to do with the journey of individuation and the development of self, of what we call the self. Saturn as a psychic process. This is from Liz Green, one of the world's great astrologers. She wrote this classic book, Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil. I really recommend it. Extremely easy to read. And she describes Saturn as a psychic process by which we can utilize the difficult experiences that we have, grief, pain, restriction, limits, boundaries, discipline, as a way to create greater consciousness and fulfillment in life. I like to say about Saturn, Saturn in a personality is like a skeleton in the body. It's the same thing. It's not the prettiest thing, but without it, the whole thing falls apart, okay? You have to have Saturn to have structure. If you look at somebody's natal chart and you see a really problematic Saturn, you see people who have major, major problems with structure, either way overstructured or inability to create structure, and have very, very challenging relationships with the idea of structure. But it's not just external structure, it's internal structure. That's the journey of individuation, where a person goes from their individuated at oneness of pre-birth, and then they come out into the cold world and they're slapped on the ass and told that, hi, congratulations, you're your own person now. And you kind of spend the rest of your life trying to get through that and find out what happens next. That's what Saturn is in the journey of the person and the personality. So Capricorn is motivated by feelings of responsibility. I look at it in this is one way to look at it. This is one drawing way to look at it. I'm going to show you a couple of other ways. So you have the sun and the moon over here as almost the same planet. It's the sun and the moon are flip sides of each other here with Cancer and Leo. And down here you've got Saturn and the two sides of Saturn, Aquarius and Capricorn. And of course they oppose each other in the Jewish year. So those, we'll look at that in a different picture, but Saturn, Capricorn is opposite the moon which is the planet of the zodiac sign Cancer in the zodiac. So Saturn is in this configuration. Saturn is father and the moon is the mother. Capricorn strives to work hard to initiate manifestation of his security and accomplishments goals. They are responsible and hardworking because they're insecure. They have security issues, just like Cancer does, but it's two different kinds of security. Cancer is concerned with emotional security, and Capricorn is concerned with external security, the security of status, the security of wealth, the security of what other people think of you, and what your position in the world is. This is also the patriarch, the hermit, kind of like law and order, principles and standards, the stereotypical Old Testament type of father as king and first servant of the state, the serious withdrawn person. This is Saturn and melancholy. The emotional extremes between Saturn and the moon, I think, are very interesting because Saturn is typically melancholy or depressive, but the moon is loony, as in lunar. You've heard of people saying that person is loony. That's like manic or moody, right? So that's the dichotomy between those two opposite planets. Over here, you've got a better illustration of how they're opposite. If you can see my mouse moving around, up here, Capricorn, Saturn, down here, Moon, Cancer, you have that dichotomy between the two. And next time we meet, we're going to talk about this Saturn-Sun dichotomy, because I said before, Saturn is like a dark sun, I guess you could say, right? So sun, 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 moon. There's a reason why Saturn, why they're next to each other in Capricorn and Aquarius. For the same reason that the moon and the sun are next to each other, and everything else is in its own array. Okay, so there's this book. I want to show you this book. I don't know. I'm going to just stop the share for a minute just so I can show you something that you should get for yourself if you can afford it. You might have to get a second job. It's very expensive. It's super, super heavy. It weighs like, I don't know, it feels like it weighs about 15 pounds, but it's probably more like 7 or 8 pounds. It's called Saturn and Melancholy, Studies in the History of Natural Philosophy, Religion, and Art. This book is going to tell you everything you want to know about Saturn, the planet, as a symbol, an archetype of the idea of melancholy, which is the archetype of the Jew, right? From the idea that we are a melancholy people. This also makes a very good weapon. If someone tries to break into your house, you could chuck it at them and it would really hurt them. It's sharp and heavy. So I recommend it just for that alone, if not for its actual contents. Okay, I'm going back to my share screen here. I just thought I would break it up with a little laugh because it's so Saturn-like, right? So there's this idea in the ancient world about the four humors, and I'm sure you've heard it before. Hippocrates invented it. It's the idea that there's four kinds of liquids in the body, or humors as they called them, right? So blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. So they were thought to be related to the four elements: earth, fire, water, and air. Black bile was linked to the gallbladder. Its imbalance was thought to cause depression. In fact, the word melancholy is derived from the Greek word that means black bile. So the melancholy personality, Moses, our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu himself, is the classic melancholy personality. Okay, think of Moshe, how he suffered, this internal suffering. He didn't want to do what he was called to do. He made a lot of excuses about it. He suffered with the children of Israel. He was humiliated. He had to ask God to justify him. And then in the end, he got mad and he blew it and couldn't even come into the promised land. So, and then think of the book of Deuteronomy, which is Moshe giving over Matan Torah. He's telling the whole thing in his own words. it's a cry fest from beginning to end. Like by the end, you're just crying. You just can't believe that he's gone through so much with the children of Israel and suffered like that. This is from Saturn and Melancholy, the book Saturn is the Dragon of Time, and this is Saturn as wisdom. So there's the idea of Saturn classically, Father Time, the wise father, the myth of Kronos. Kronos is the god of time. And of course, time is money, Saturn counting money, the association of Capricorn and Saturn with material wealth and acquisitiveness was an archetype. There's a book I have here, which I won't wave at you. It's much lighter and you cannot use it to harm anyone because it's not nearly as big as the other one. It's called Saturn's Jews by the scholar Moshe Adel. It's absolutely the bottom line book in terms of references and understanding the development of the idea of Saturn in Jewish thought. So Ibn Ezra, this is from Ibn Ezra's Reshit Chachma, among the nations, the Jews are presided over by Saturn. And then he lists all sorts of other things about Saturn, the thought and the scarcity of speech and fraud, the isolation from men, the power to overcome them, every tree which produces the poison of death, and the greatness of thought and the knowledge of secrets and the worship of God and the Jewish nation is the lot of Saturns. So, and it goes on. He says over here in the Book of Reasons that the Jews, talking about Saturn is cold and dry, and of the Jews because their sign is Aquarius, which is their house. Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. So the idea that Saturn is the planetary of the ruler of the Jewish people was very much believed and understood not only by our own commentators, of course, Ibn Ezra being number one and Abraham Barhia as well, but going back far before them by non-Jewish sources, Roman historians and St. Augustine. So this is like the time of the First Temple. By the First Temple era, there was a very well-known link between Saturn and the day of the week, Yom Shabbat, Saturday, the holiest day of the week for the Jews. So it was like the Jewish day. Everybody knew that Saturday was the Jewish day because the Jews had a special relationship with Saturday. And in both systems, the Hellenistic system and the Jewish system, Saturn is the planetary ruler of the day of Saturday. Interestingly, the Greek and Arab astrology considered Saturn to be the most malignant of all of the planets. And the Jews were, of course, astrologically governed by Saturn and were considered to be contaminated by the planet's wicked nature. Ibn Ezra has a real interesting take on it. He says that Saturn, he associates Saturn with the fourth commandment, ordering one to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, and explains that this correspondence allows the Jews, by not occupying themselves with everyday matters, but devoting themselves solely to the fear of God on this day, they protect themselves from Saturn's baneful influence and also to improve the quality of their religious beliefs. So basically, what Ibn Ezra believed and taught was that the day of Shabbat that was ruled by Saturn, Saturn was this malefic planet, but because the Jews kept Shabbat, meaning that they didn't do ordinary things and they said their magical ritualistic words, they made Kiddush, then they made Havdalah at the end of it with fire and with wine and with smelling things and the various different rituals that the Jewish people did throughout history to delineate between the beginning and the end of Shabbat. Under that umbrella of Shabbat, they were protected from Saturn, which was like doing bad things to everyone else but them, because they had a special relationship with Saturn, but only because of their behavior, not because Saturn liked them better. Okay, so I hope that all you Capricorns out there aren't going to get too sad about this, because Capricorn is a wonderful sign. There are so many great things you can say about Capricorn. Capricorns are incredibly loyal. Capricorns are incredibly hardworking. Capricorns are incredibly responsible. Capricorn is who you want to give your car keys to when you're drunk. Capricorn is the designated driver. Capricorn is the most responsible employee that you have. And of course, everybody has Capricorn in their own personal natal chart. So where Capricorn falls in your own personal natal chart is where you're going to exhibit those Saturn-like qualities. And depending on if you have planets in those areas or not, that's where the action is. So why does my horoscope stand for Capricorn when I was born during Shvat or Kislev? Why? Because solar Capricorn and Tevet don't always overlap. So there's various different ways one can be a Capricorn or be born in the month of Tevet, but you might be a Kislev Capricorn or a Tevet Sagittarius, a Tevet Capricorn or a Tevet Aquarius. So it all just depends on what year of the 19-year Metonic cycle you were born in. So as I said, everyone's got all 12 signs in their chart. And let's look at the chart for the United States of America, which has been our sample chart that we've been using all along. As we said last month, of course, we have Sagittarius rising, putting Capricorn in our second house with Pluto, the planet Pluto right there at 27 degrees. We're having our first ever Pluto return, people. So Capricorn is the ruler of the second house. Second house is money. It's a person's wealth, their material possessions, their material world, their values, their valuables, and what is called mine, what belongs to me. So America's natal Pluto in Capricorn is plutocracy, right? It's ruled by the rich for the rich. And this was the founding of America, 1776. Landowners, white male landowners were the only ones who were allowed to vote, who were enfranchised. America is a very, very wealthy country. America inherently, not even counting all the development that has been done in the last 200x amount of years, just the natural resources are vast natural resources, which are incredibly valuable. The way that the conquest, development, and exploitation of those natural resources across the continent by big business ruled by Capricorn is very American. There's nothing more American than that. Manifest destiny is Capricorn idea. Big business, corporate America, very Capricorn. And interestingly, across the way there in the 8th house, which is the opposite of the second house, America has all of these planets, Mercury, the Sun, Jupiter, and Venus, all in Cancer. So that's stuff that we share with other countries, so to speak, that we share our resources, our valuables, our values. And those relationships are all about security. So it's interesting. Everything that we share has something to do with either making all of these other countries feel more secure or making us feel more secure. But we're definitely not giving anything away. Whatever we do to benefit any other country, we're doing to benefit ourselves. Talkless bottom line on that. So we're not just altruistic. We're definitely out for ourselves here. So that's where we are. We're going to stop. It's 12:58. I'll take a couple of questions if anybody has any. So next time we meet, when we talked about Chodesh Tevet, which is going to be in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking more about Saturn, but the Aquarian version of Saturn rather than the Capricorn version of Saturn, and how these 2 months sort of work together in tandem. And I'm going to turn this off. Stop share. Okay. Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing? Julia, I did not get to look at your chart at all that you sent me, so I can't make any comment on it.
I think you might at least enjoy it.
I will. I will do that. I plan to do that.
I had it done in the 80s, maybe early 80s, a long time ago.
Right, but you're a Capricorn. You're a sun sign Capricorn. Capricorns are very, very, very I mean, Capricorn's the earth sign, and Capricorn is the cardinal earth sign. Cardinal is initiating. So they initiate manifestation. You want to use your Capricorn in a person's birth chart. You want to use that part of you to initiate the manifestation of whatever it is you're trying to achieve. It really has a lot to do with personal achievement in terms of how it's used externally. Internally, it has to do with personal development and the development of the self. As it's a much friendlier way, I think, to look at the experience of Saturn, because Saturn, you can't just have a planet being like, oh no, Saturn's doing this and that every day of the week. There's something bad going on. That doesn't work in modern life. There's just too many variables. And I think that one of the real upsides of modern astrology is the ability to look at it through a psychological lens rather than a, causative lens.
It seems to me that, a very limited knowledge really of astrology, although it's really interesting. And my friend who did this for me years ago was a scholar, and that was fun. But it seems to me that, these signs are, it's like it's a kaleidoscope. You turn it, and they're all in all of us. And so it's how we choose to, or how the fates kind of amplify one aspect or another. And so that's interesting. So like another, like if I was looking at the Aries in me, I would find that somewhere doing something, right?
Right, exactly. Yes, that's understanding a person's own natal chart has a lot to do with understanding that that we contain multitudes, and that we have all of these parts within us. And it's about integrating them, understanding them, working with those energies so that it's a toolbox. So you're not going to use a hammer for a screwdriver's function. So something can be described like Capricorn having to do with the attribute of anger, unrectified, where a person gets angry might have to do with their Capricorn area of their life, and that's going to go to their sense of insecurity. I feel insecure about X, therefore I'm going to have an angry reaction to it. I'm going to project it out onto something else. So understanding that about oneself really helps. In that one moment, you can catch yourself and go, oh, wait a minute. I don't have to use a hammer. I can use a screwdriver for this,
I just want to say, I think that I love tying it to the Jewish psyche and character, and whatever you think, it's very interesting. It's kind of symbolically the symbols and the icons and the how I don't know if you talked about this in any other, but like the deeper roots of astrology, I think, go back to the East, right?
Well, yeah, it goes back to Babylon, India. Babylon and Chaldea. Yeah,
but I mean, I think I read somewhere, that there's a relationship to our astrology, the Western astrology, and also to the Indian. If we go back far enough, and I don't know if that affects the Jewish,
That's a Vedic astrology is a different system. So it's not the same as Western astrology, and quote unquote Jewish astrology is based on Western astrology. But I think what you're referring to is the idea that the science of astrology is so ancient, it goes back so far. And they say that Abraham, he had sons with Keturah, and he gave them gifts and sent them to the East. That's been said by our commentators and sages, that these are the mystical knowledge that we get from the Hindu religions and the Eastern religions. Actually, Hinduism is another thing that's ruled by Capricorn. Capricorn is the ruling planet of the Hodu, of the Indian people. It's thought to be.
It just feels like the Jews are in the catbird seat from time to time, and this is one of them, right?
We're the canary in the coal mine. Yes,
that's different.
Jerry, did you have a question?
At the beginning, you spoke of a prohibition against consulting astrologers. Where did that come from?
The Shulchan Aruch.
So we have a lot in our text, in Sefer Yetzirah and the Torah, but Shulchan, how did they get to?
Well, they got that way. I mean, that's an interesting development of how the Shulchan Aruch even came to be, because it didn't just pop out of Zeus's forehead. to use a really terribly mixed analogy. So the whole development of how the book of Jewish law that came to be and what they decided to put in it and what was understood by it was clearly not what was done. Because you see, it says this, but at the same time, what if astrology was so asur and so forbidden, why was it all over the synagogue? Why was it on Torah crowns? Why was it on Torah dresses and swaddling cloths for babies who had just been circumcised and calendars? Obviously, it was a part of our life. So what does it mean when it says that you should not consult astrologers? So Chaim Soloveitchik in his work postulates that what he calls mimetic communal norms were just normal, like the normal everyday way that people understood, quote unquote, what we call the law, because it's in a book that we go to the bookstore and we buy. There's a book and it says this, but it's not how people actually live, that there was a gap between those two things. So like, the Shulchan Aruch might give certain really specific directions about how to keep kosher, but how do I know how to keep kosher? Because I was in my mother's kitchen. How does she know from her mother? How does she know from her mother? So these are mimetic, as in mimicking, communal norms that were in everyday Jewish communities that got cut off. Like we lost what that was with the Holocaust. We don't know anything. So we're post-Holocaust, very small amount of Jews surviving, and they're like, do you remember how to keep kosher? Do you remember what mom used to do? No, not exactly. Let's look what is written. So they go back to the book. This is how this whole, there's an entire ideas that what we know now as orthodoxy is a completely contrived post-World War II enterprise that came about because it's completely text-based and not based on what was actually done in what I'm going to call normative Jewish communities. Not that there's such a thing, but there is. Do you know what I mean? Normative for that region. How did they do it in Hungary? How did they do it in the Pale of the Settlement? How did they do it in Eastern Europe? How did they do it in France? Each community had their own standards, so to speak, or how they did things under a very much broader web of responses and books and safers and rabbis and Popeyes that were like this interwoven web of communications that were going on all the time. In other words, it was a living organism. Halacha has always been a creative living organism that responded to the needs of a community or the invention of a new thing like a light bulb at any given time. And it wasn't until modernity came along and threatened the Jewish communities by, intruding in it with rude ideas like the earth wasn't created in 6,000 years or the Bible might have been written by more than one person. The intrusion of modern ideas created a backlash. So it was like, no more chidushim. That's it. It's closed. It's a closed book. This is it. And there was a movement to just kill halacha, kill the living soul of halacha by making it so set in stone, which it never had been before. So, even just talking about the Shulchan Aruch, there's a whole, I took a class at Nishmat in Jerusalem in 2007 that was like 13 weeks of how we even got to the Shulchan Aruch through all these other texts. So there's just a lot. There's a lot. I know that doesn't answer your question completely, but hopefully I tried. Mark, did
No, it does.
A question?
I just thought all Jews agreed about everything.
No. Wait, Jews that agree about things? Where are they?
Where are they?
I don't know anyone like that.
Thank you.
Mark, did you have a question?
Yes. So I have this small glitch in my learning, and I just want to resolve it. And if it's too big, we can just forget about it. But, we have the temple in Jerusalem, and it gives us the Holy of Holies, the King of Kings, we want to go straight to the top and, you know, not deal with the helpers, right? So my understanding is Jupiter is the kingmaker, but then we hear about how Saturn is associated with Jews. And I would think that, I mean, I know obviously you don't just pick a planet. So I'm just trying to like reconcile.
Well, Zeus is Jupiter. And so, but Zeus had a father who was Kronos, who was time, which was Saturn. Saturn, okay. in the previous episode of the Greek mythology that preceded the Roman mythology, there's the idea that Zeus's father was jealous of his own children, and he ate them, and then they cut him open from the inside or tricked him into throwing up, depending on what story. But Zeus isn't the prime mover father. That's father time, so to speak. That's Saturn. Saturn Saturn is more like Atik Yomin, the Ancient of Days.
Okay.
Right. So even in the Kabbalistic system, Saturn, this is also another crazy thing. So Saturn is associated with the color black and the direction of north. And in the Tikkun Zohar, there's I don't take the Zohar as Lahavdil. I'm not going to say there's more than one system in the Zohar that describes the planets and their association with the Sphirot. But in terms of the colors and the Sphirotic lineup in the Tikkun HaZohar, there's a passage that describes Saturn as being associated with Yesod and the color black. So they has Yesod connecting, the connector Yesod to Malchut is Saturn. And I was like, no, that can't be. It doesn't make sense. It has to be Mercury. Mercury is the planet that connects it's the communicative planet. But they mount a good case. The Zohar does. I wrote a whole paper in which I argued the opposite. That Danny Matt thought it was very creative and good. But like all these systems have counter systems. So there is no such thing as only one system. As we've talked about before, we have the chronological system where Joseph is not split into two tribes, and we have like the social system, or the tribes around the Mishkan. That's where Joseph is split into two tribes, and the Levi'im are all on the inside, right? The different tribes, the different families of the Levitical families around the Mishkan, and there are different ways. So, but on the Choshen Mishpat, the high priest's breastplate, it's the chronological order. So it's just depends. It's malleable, like all symbolic systems are. So I hope that's helpful, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us today at the Aquarian Minyan Yeshiva. Since I'm here, I guess I should do a commercial for some fantastic classes coming up. So I will do that. Let me stop the live stream.